Okie dokie. So, where do we leave off? 22?
Yeah.
22. Okay. So, let's see. 22. If you see a fellow Israelite's ox or sheep straying, do not ignore it and be sure to take it back to its owner. If they do not live near you or if they do not know who owns it, take it home with you and keep it until they come looking for it. Then give it back. Do the same if you find their donkey or their cloak or anything else they have lost. Do not ignore it. Basically the main gist of this is that, as we're going on through our lives and everything, if you see somebody needing help, whether they know it or not, help them. Don't just have the attitude of, well, not my problem. That's kind of prevalent today. But try not to have that. It says, so if you see your fellow Israelites' donkey or ox has fallen on the road, do not ignore it. Help the owner to get it to its feet. A woman, when I read this, I was like, man, if anybody, there's going to be people that's going to hear me teach this and everything on Spotify or whatever, and they're going to flip their lid. A woman must not wear men's clothing, nor a man wear women's clothing. For the Lord your God detests anyone who does this. So, this, to, I'm assuming everybody in this room, would be basic stuff. However, the world we live in, this really has nothing to do with, the transgender and all that stuff in and of itself. This is like, what you would call a transvestite, a guy that likes dressing up in women's clothing and stuff like that. That's sinful. Some people may say, well, he's not hurting anybody. Well, no, he is. His body is a temple to the Lord. So that is not how we're supposed to conduct ourselves. So it says, if you come across the bird's nest beside the road, either in a tree or on the ground, and the mother is sitting on the young or on the eggs, do not take the mother with the young. You may take the young, but be sure to let the mother go, so that it may go well with you and you may have a long life. So in other words, don't kill the mom because she can go out and she can keep, producing. It's okay to take the young. It's okay to, eat the little birdies. It's kind of messed up, but God says it's cool. So,
Moving on.
In my sister's case, that would be it's okay to eat all the little cats, but don't don't mess with the big cats. So it says, when you build a new house, make a parapet around the roof so that you may not bring guilt on the bloodshed of your house if someone falls from the roof. So this one's actually, all this is relatively practical, but this one's really practical. So the way that they make their houses there, many of them are made out of stone, or other kind of like hardened material, but a lot of it's made out of stone. But basically what he's saying is a parapet is basically like a rail, but it's not like a metal rail like we would think of today as a rail. It's basically kind of like a half wall, okay? So the reason why they do that is because their porch was their roof. So you would always see stairs going up the side of the house, and then they would be able to be on the flat roof. And what he's saying here is build a border around it, because you're going to have your neighbor over for barbecue one day, and he's going to take a swan dive off your house, and it's going to be your fault because it's your house. So build that rail around it. That's how when we saw the story of the paraplegic man and he was lowered down to Jesus, that's how they got up there, is because they went up the stairs on the side of the house to the flat part of it, and they started digging through it. So that's how they got into the house and everything. Let's see here. Do not plant. So this one's kind of interesting. We'll talk about it a little bit. Do not plant two kinds of seeds in your vineyard. If you do, not only the crops you plant, but also the fruit of the vineyard will be defiled. Likewise, do not plow an ox and a donkey yoked together. Likewise, do not wear clothes of wool and linen woven together. So I kind of wrote this on your notes and everything, kind of like the meaning behind all this stuff, if you kind of look at your notes on it. But essentially, there are certain things that are just meant to be separate, okay? The plants and everything, that's practical advice. If you're going to plant something, plant whatever you're going to plant. Don't plant a whole bunch of stuff and everything mixed in together. Because what's going to wind up happening a lot of the times is they're going to wind up choking each other out. But do not wear clothes of wool and linen. So this is especially for like the Jews, obviously, which these guys are, the Hebrews. But like this is something that like if somebody from the Sanhedrin or something like that saw you doing, they would be on you like white on rice, because this is a purity issue. Okay, you're supposed to be pure. So by weaving these two types of clothing together, it's basically a signature of being impure. Okay, so God says don't do it. He has his own reasons. It's probably not because it's going to make you itch. But at the end of the day, that's what he wants done. But all of this has to do with, like the yoke. So it says, do not plow an ox and a donkey yoke together. Well, an ox and a donkey, they're not equally yoked. Okay, an ox is going to be way stronger than a donkey. So when you sit there and you try to yoke them together, you try to put the same weight on them, it's like that's not going to work, okay? It's the same thing as us being married. We're supposed to be married to somebody which we're equally yoked. A lot of people will attribute that to faith in Christ, and that's absolutely true. But there's 1,000 other things, okay? If somebody is incredibly intelligent and marries somebody who's not very intelligent, that's probably going to cause an issue sooner or later. If somebody is an incredibly hard worker and they're married to somebody that's just bone dead lazy, that's probably going to cause an issue. If somebody has a particular way of raising children that says, oh, you did a bad thing, go stand in that corner, and then another person has a way of raising children that says, I told you not to do that, you're probably going to have an issue. So these are things that, especially in a relationship, when you sit there and you talk about being equally yoked, you need to kind of have these conversations. In the residency class that I'm in, one of the things that we talked about, and actually since I, married one of the couples that's in here, which they're not in here now, I'm going to have to get on them. So, I married Eric and Dawn. And one of the things that we did before we did that, we didn't do it as much as I would have liked. We didn't have time. But we kind of like went over, kind of like counseling questions, hey, how do you feel about this? How do you feel about that? That really should be done. I don't want to say necessarily in a professional setting, but it definitely helps because you start asking questions you never really thought about. How to handle money. Do we think of money the same way? Do we think of child raising the same way? It's the same thing. So God's basically saying this from a practical standpoint, saying, don't do this to your poor animals, but by the same point, it's a life lesson that we can kind of get out of this. We need to be equally yoked. So, and then finally it says, make tassels on the four corners of the cloak you wear. Well, like most of the stuff that we're reading in Deuteronomy, we read about this in Leviticus. So the four corners, you're supposed to have like a blue strip come down, a little tassel. In Hebrew, it's called a tzitzit. In Greek, it's called crespedon. And that is the thing that's supposed to dangle down. And if I'm wearing them and I see them, they are to remind me of God's law. So I always have a reminder of God's law on me at all times. God says the same thing about their door frames, okay? If you go to a Jewish person's house, maybe not in this country, but say like you go to Israel, you go to one of their houses and everything, you're going to see a little box, a little flat box, right there on their door frame, okay? And as they walk past it, every single time, no matter they're coming in and out, they're going to kiss it and kiss the box. And what that box is that box holds a little parchment in it of God's law. It's a phrase or it's a section of one of the books of Moses. So it's an always reminder of God's law, and that's what this is. When the woman who is bleeding for 12 years gets healed, and it says that she grasps his cloak, in the Greek, she's not actually grasping his cloak, she's grasping the crespedon. She's grabbing that tassel, and she believes that as long as I can grab that tassel, I'll be healed, and that's what heals her, is her faith. So it says, if a marriage takes a wife, or marriage, good grief, if a man takes a wife, and after sleeping with her, dislikes her, and slanders her, and gives her a bad name, saying, I married this woman, and when I approached her, I did not find proof of her virginity. Then the young woman's father and mother shall bring the town elders at the gate proof that she was a virgin. So before I continue, I'm just going to go ahead and just clarify this. When it says if he is sleeping with her and dislikes her, okay, What that is specifically referring to is he has had sex with her and he does not find her to be a virgin. It has nothing to do with anything in the bedroom. It's just he had sex with her. There was no proof that she was a virgin. The proof, which you're going to find out as we read, is essentially the bedclothes, okay? When a virgin has sex for the first time, she bleeds. If there's no evidence of that, then chances are she's probably not a virgin, okay? Now, in this day and age, we know there's different reasons for different stuff and everything like that, but by and large, that is the case. So when it says that they would bring proof, what they would bring proof of is they would bring the linens from the marriage bed. And they would say, look, she bled. So she was a virgin. Okay? And it says there, and it says, her father will say to the elders, I gave my daughter in marriage, and he has slandered her and said, I do not find your daughter to be a virgin, but here is the proof of my daughter's virginity. Then her parents shall display the cloth before the elders of the town, and the elders shall take the man and punish him. They shall fine him 100 shekels of silver, and give him to the young woman's father, because this man has given an Israelite virgin a bad name. She shall continue to be his wife, and he must not divorce her as long as he lives. So in other words, if you make this claim, if you guys remember, this kind of reminds you of what's called the test of an unfaithful wife. Okay, where he basically accuses her. She has to go to the tent of meeting. It's the only time a woman is ever allowed in the tent of meeting. She goes in and she's given a mixture of basically dirt and water, and she is asked the question, did you have an affair on your husband? If she says no and she drinks the water, her intestines basically fall out. Okay? That's the curse of it, all right? And I sat there, and first question everybody asks is, well, what happens to the guy if the guy has an affair, okay? And that's what I was explaining. I was like, you got to look at this from both ways. This isn't just the test of an unfaithful wife. It's also the test of a husband. Because if the husband accuses her and then she drinks that water and nothing happens, then everybody in the entire camp knows this guy's full of it, okay? And it's the same way here, okay? If he intends to accuse her of not being a virgin, he had better be right. Because if he just is not satisfied for whatever reason and then tries to use that as a scapegoat, and then evidence is provided at the fact that, she was a virgin, then not only does he have to pay money and he's fined, he looks like a complete moron and is really shunned by basically, his tribe, but also he is, for lack of a better word, stuck with her. Like, there is no reason for divorce at this point. There is no reason to give her a certificate of divorce. If she goes and has an affair after the fact, he's still married to her. So he has no recourse at that point. So it's one of those kind of things. You have to look at it from both ways. You have to look at it from, this is a way that a man can in fact get out of a marriage if she truly is not a virgin, in which case she would be stoned. She would be killed. But also, it's a way to protect the girl, okay? Because if, in fact, he decides for whatever reason, this was a mistake, I probably shouldn't have done this, and he tries to initiate that, there's going to be a severe consequence if he's wrong. So it's not just, an out. So a sister says, let's see here, if, however, the charge is true, no proof of the young woman's virginity can be found, she shall be brought to the door of her father's house there, and the men of her town shall stone her to death. She has done an outrageous thing in Israel by being promiscuous while still in her father's house, and you must purge the evil from among you. If a man is found sleeping with another man's wife, both the man who slept with her and the woman must die. You must purge the evil from Israel. So does that remind you of any particular story? When Jesus found the woman and everything having an affair, and everybody picked up stones, and he sits there and he says, he who cast the first stone, okay, or he who's never sinned cast the first stone. So, and you have to kind of look at that and you think of those stories and you're like, well, wait a minute. That seems like there's a severe contradiction here, okay? Jesus never said that it would have been unlawful and everything for them to kill her. He never said that. But what he was trying to do, again, one of the things that God teaches us, and this is in the Old Testament, not the New, Jesus mentions it in the New Testament, is I desire mercy. Okay? I desire mercy above sacrifice. So when Jesus came and when he was teaching these lessons and everything, he's basically like, yeah, you have every right to stone her. But think about this for a minute. Who here has not messed up? Who here has not prayed for mercy from God? Who here has not done something wrong and wished they never did it and would do anything they could to take it back? If anybody's never had that happen, go right ahead. Got my blessing. And everybody threw their stones down. So again, it wasn't like he was changing the law. He was just kind of changing the mindset behind the law. So, it also says, if a man happens to meet in town a virgin pledged to be married, and he sleeps with her, you shall take both of them to the gate of that town and stone them to death. The young woman, because she was in town and she did not scream for help, and the man, because he violated another man's wife. You must purge the evil from among you. So again, this has to do with basically having an affair. If she's betrothed, essentially she's married. Okay, remember when Joseph found out that Mary was pregnant, it sat there and said that he planned on divorcing her quietly. Well, in this country, if I'm engaged to somebody, I don't need to get a divorce. Okay, I just say, wedding date's off, peace, I'm out. But in that culture, that's not the case. If you are betrothed to somebody, you are essentially married, okay? That contract has been signed. Everything is good to go. The only thing that has not happened is the wedding date, okay? But we also have to understand the difference between this culture and that culture. In that culture, even if you're betrothed to that other person, you are not allowed to be around that person by yourself, okay? You will always have a chaperone with you, okay? They do not give you the opportunity to fall into that, because guess what? They know if you have the opportunity, chances are it's probably going to happen. So there's always a chaperone there the entire time. But on the contrast of that, it says, but if out and within the country a man happens to meet a young woman pledged to be married and rapes her, only the man who has done this shall die. Do nothing to the woman; she has committed no sin deserving death. This case is like someone who attacks and murders a neighbor, for the man found the young woman out in the country, and though the betrothed woman screamed, there was no one to rescue her. So if a man happens to meet a virgin who is not pledged to be married and rapes her, and they are discovered, he shall pay her father 50 shekels of silver, and he must marry the young woman, for he has violated her, and he can never divorce her for as long as she lives. Now, I got to be honest with you. There's not a whole lot of things that when I get to heaven and everything, I'm going to kind of sit down and say, God, I got to admit, this one I don't get. This one I don't get, okay? Can you imagine for a second, okay? And I'll be honest with you. They're not, how do I say this without sounding like a psychopath? I don't get emotionally upset about a lot of stuff, okay? I'm a very even keel kind of guy. Even with certain crimes, I'm just like, okay, they committed the crime, this is their sentence, whatever the case may be. One crime that genuinely does bother me, like it really, really bothers me, is rape. That bothers me a lot. If somebody was a drunk driver and killed one of my kids, I think I could probably forgive them. If somebody rapes my wife, you'll never see me again. I promise you of this. You'll never see them again either. It's just something in me. I don't know why. I just have a real bad stick in my craw about this crime. I think this is a horrible, horrible, horrible thing you could do to somebody. And God says, if this person rapes this girl, and she's not already betrothed, he has to marry her. Can you imagine what that is like for that girl? I'm just going to be straight up honest with you. I normally, even for the stuff with like the killing and all that kind of stuff, I can say, okay, this is the reason. I got no clue on this one. And I'm just going to be completely honest with you. I have no idea why God would want that to happen. I know he's God, and I know I'm not, and I know his ways are much higher than my ways, and I'm not going to argue that in any way, shape, or form. But I'm just as a teacher, I can't teach you that. I have no idea why he would order that. But nonetheless, that's what he says.
But wouldn't it be like if she was raped, then she would not be a virgin for anyone and no one would marry her?
That's true. Yeah, she's basically...
So providing a way for her to be married. I mean, you could be married and maybe not live together.
Nah, you're married, you're living together. In this culture,
In
yeah.
that culture.
Yeah, I mean, but you're exactly right. I mean, you're basically essentially damaged goods, and once she is raped, her life is pretty much over. I mean, she will never, no man will ever marry her. She will never bear children. She is considered damaged goods, okay? That's not going to happen. So that's absolutely accurate. But I'm just thinking from the woman's standpoint.
Maybe she could give him some antifreeze.
Maybe.
I see
That
the one where the woman was accused of not being a virgin after they got married.
Yeah.
I see that one too, the same way. Like, she's stuck with that guy.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
and what kind of life is that going to be?
Yeah. Yeah, that could be something and everything. It'd be like, I'm sorry, I didn't see the stain, my bad, that kind of thing and everything. But I mean, seriously, I don't get that. I don't understand why God would want that for somebody. But he does. And, you know, like I said, he knows better. This isn't an argument of like, you know, God's immoral or whatever. This is just an argument of, I'm not smart enough to understand it. I've literally prayed upon this. I have, you know, like God kind of opened my eyes to this one, but maybe it's just my own flesh and my own, you know, indignation when it comes to that particular sin. I don't get it. So if you guys ever figure it out, by all means, come tell me.
Does the man have to provide for her for the rest of her life?
Yep.
All of her needs?
Yep. He must marry the young woman.
The reason.
Oh! Ouch! Okay, I don't know if you can read the room. There's a lot of women here.
I mean, if it's showing, you know, you made a mistake and you're going to pay for it, buddy.
Yeah.
For the rest of your life.
There you go.
You're going to pay for it for the rest of your life.
I guess.
And everybody in town is going to know that you are going to pay for it.
All right.
Hey, Ryan,
Yeah.
maybe it's rape's not the right word. I mean, other translations use different words.
No, that's
Seized, seduces.
yeah. In the Greek,
uses rape.
in the Greek, it's rape. In the Greek, it's rape. It's basically so like in the Greek and everything, you have different. Actually, this is in the Hebrew and everything, but both in the Greek and the Hebrew, especially in the Hebrew, actually, you have different words for different sexual acts. Okay. So, for instance, it's what's called an NIV euphemism and everything. So, if you read the story of David and Bathsheba, okay, you may kind of get the idea that he went over and he seduced her, okay? He didn't. He raped her, flat out. He basically used his power and his influence and said, I'm the king, and as the king, I can basically have any concubine that I want, and I want you. So there was no... If you ever watched the movie and everything with... who's the guy from Pretty Woman? Richard Gere. He made a movie and everything where he was King David. It is the dumbest, most ridiculous version of that story because they were in love with each other. No, they were not in love with each other. He raped her. And and he was done with her. It's not like they had a relationship. He had sex with her. He raped her. He dumped her. Okay? He said, thanks a lot. Appreciate it. I'm out. Going back to the palace. The only reason that anything happened after the fact is because she got pregnant. And when he found that out, he had Uriah the Hittite, her husband, come home from battle, from war, and said, hey, it's been a while since you've had your wife and everything. Why don't you go over there and take care of business and everything? Sleep in your own bed tonight. And Uriah the Hittite's like, no, I'm not. My warrior friends are dying. I'm going to go fight. So after that, then he comes up with the idea to kill Uriah the Hittite. And then after that, that's when he takes Bathsheba as his own. Okay? So yeah, no, that really comes down to the different versions and stuff like that. But no, he raped her. And that's what this is talking about. So he must marry the young woman, for he's violated her. I mean, that right there, he has violated her. He can never divorce her as long as he lives. So it says, a man is not to marry his father's wife, because he must not dishonor his father's bed. So again, what story does this remind you of? Okay, if you go to 1 Corinthians, this happens. Okay, in 1 Corinthians, Corinth was a church of utter dismay. Okay, horrible church. Paul had a brain aneurysm almost from this church. Okay, he was there for over a year and a half, trying to set this church up in operation. There were other churches he was there for 3 months and he was gone. This church he was there for a year and a half, and he was so scared for his life that he planned on fleeing, but God said, no, stay put, and that's when he actually winds up taking a Nazirite vow. So Corinth was not a good church. It was in the same place as the Temple of Aphrodite that you could just go up the hill and have sex with cult prostitutes. So you were basically competing with that in the church. So these guys write Paul, and a letter gets to him, and they basically say, several different things are problems going on. Factions in the church, divisions, people are following different people, such like that. One of the problems is a man is having intimate relationships with his father's wife, assuming the father is likely dead at this point. And the church is like, but we're being open-minded about this. Okay? And Paul is like, I don't even know the dude, and I've already passed judgment on him. Kick him out of the church. Okay, get him out. So where does he get that from? Is he just like being obstinate towards this, and he's not being loving and everything? No, it says it right here. Okay, you must not dishonor your father's bed. Okay, don't do that. By the same token, any ancestral relationship and everything would likely be in the exact same category, but you don't do that. So what wound up happening with that gentleman was, as we found out in 2 Corinthians, he repented, he stopped having that relationship, and he wanted to come back to the church, but the church was like, nothing doing. You're a sinner, go away. To which Paul again said, you people are a bunch of morons, and you have no idea what you're doing. If he's repented, bring him back. The whole point of kicking him out was to have him repent to be brought back. Okay? When we get to 1 and 2 Corinthians, basically, it's just 2 ball-out sessions is all it is. I mean, it's the best thing about Corinthians, truthfully, which most people won't actually act on it, unfortunately, but the best thing about Corinthians is it is one of the few books in the Bible that truly teaches you how to run a church, or how to deal with things in the church. Because of all the bad things that are happening in the church, Paul tells you this is how you fix this. Okay? If somebody is openly sinning in the church, kick them out. Okay, this idea of first you go talk to them. You take 2 people to go talk to them. If they don't repent, take a couple more. If they don't repent, eventually get them out. And that sounds harsh, but the entire purpose of kicking them out is so that way they have the 2x4 to the head that says, maybe they're right. Maybe I'm doing something wrong. And then if they ever repent of it and then they want to come back, then of course they can come back. But if we have that open sinning in the church where everybody is just, having an affair, doing homosexuality, whatever the case may be, that is a major issue, because then we're not a church anymore. Then we're just a bunch of people getting together and we're just talking about Jesus for an hour a week and then we go home. Okay, then we've lost the holiness of the church. So that sounds harsh, but that's the reality. And I've always said, people will argue, well, Jesus talked with sinners and ate with sinners. He absolutely did, out in the world. When the sin came to his father's house, he walked in there with a whip and threw around tables. Okay, big difference. Big difference. So it says, no one who has been emasculated by crushing or cutting may enter the assembly of the Lord. That's just not fair. But nonetheless, any man who is essentially what you would call a eunuch, okay? is not allowed to go into the assembly of the Lord, which the assembly of the Lord is essentially the followers of God. Okay? So if a man's had an accident and this is basically gone at this point, then he has to be removed. The only thing I can figure why, and again, I really think about this and I kind of put myself there, and the only reason I figure why is because the men are there to essentially to establish the family line. If that's not there anymore, you can't do that. So now you're just one more guy to feed. Okay, you don't really have a purpose there anymore. You cannot bear children. You cannot do anything of the sort. So you're out. So it says, no one born of a foreign or forbidden marriage, nor any of their descendants may enter the assembly of the Lord, not even in the 10th generation. No Ammonite or Moabite or any of their descendants may enter the assembly of the Lord, not even in the 10th generation. In other words, never. For they did not come to meet you with bread and water on your way when you came out of Egypt, and they hired Balaam, son of Beor, from Pethor in Aram, Naharaim, to pronounce a curse on you. However, the Lord your God would not listen to Balaam, but turned the curse into a blessing for you, because the Lord your God loves you. So, in other words, remember, when they came out of Egypt, they wanted to just pass through Ammon and Moab. They're just like, look, we're here. We want to get there. We just want to walk through if you would just allow us passage. And both of them said, you're not taking 2 million people through my land. That's not going to happen. That's a security risk beyond all measure. No. So eventually they tried to get through and they got their butts kicked. So that's why eventually they wound up staying at Kadesh Barnea for so long. You know, we always call it wandering in the wilderness. They didn't really wander very much. They were, most of the time, they were at Kadesh Barnea for about 39 years. But that's the reason why, okay? Outside of the fact that, you know, they could have just gone up the River Jordan and everything, but they didn't believe in God, and God sentenced them to 40 years. But nonetheless, they were trying to get from point A to point B, and these guys would not let them. They were not friendly to them in any way, shape, or form. So God says, don't marry them. Don't intermix with them. Don't be friends with them. Don't nothing, okay? Stay away from them. They are never to be allowed in this, ever. So
Ruth couldn't be in the...
Ruth, good question. I was wondering if I was going to catch it. So Ruth is a Moabite, okay? What's called a Moabitess, all right? She was a Moabitess. So Ruth was a Moabite. And you would sit there and you would think, okay, well, then what about Ruth? Because Ruth was the grandmother of David. Grandmother or great-grandmother, I can't remember. But she's basically descendant of David, okay? And to that question, I have no clue. God says right here, don't do it. But for whatever reason, that was allowed. Now... Because, yeah, I can't remember his name all of a sudden. Boaz. Boaz was a Jew. So, wait a minute. She was a Moabitess, but she had to have been a Jew. Because that's the whole thing of the kinsman redeemer. She was part of his family. I have to look that up.
She was a Moabite.
She was a Moabite, yeah. But she was also...
daughter-in-law of a person who was a Jewish.
Was that it? That she was a daughter-in-law?
Yeah.
Well, no, I know she was a daughter-in-law. I'm just talking about... So, the reason why I'm getting hung up on this is because the entire point of the story of Ruth, okay, is basically the kinsman redeemer, okay? The kinsman redeemer in that story is Boaz. You have to have 3 things to be a kinsman redeemer. Number 1, you have to have the resource to do it. In other words, you have to have the money, okay? Number 2, you have to have the placement, okay? In other words, because Boaz wasn't in the proper place. There was somebody else before him that could have redeemed Ruth. Mm-hmm. And he had to go to him and sit there and say, you can redeem her, you know, if you really want to. I mean, I can do it if you really don't want to. And the guy's like, oh, yeah, I'm not really interested. So Boaz was in. He was able to do it, okay? But he had to be related to her in some form. And that's what I'm sitting there thinking. I was like, yeah, she was a Moabitess, But I'm trying to. I guess the
They
daughter,
were- They were related to Ruth's mother-in-law.
Ruth's mother-in-law. Yeah.
She was Jewish.
Yeah.
Ruth wasn't. She was a Moabite.
Yeah. So basically, because the Moab or Ruth's mother had two sons, Sickly and Puny. That was the translation of their names, Sickly and Puny. And she had two sons, and she had the two daughters, and both of the sons died because, well, they were sickly and puny. And so then the two that's their names. The translations of their names is sickly and puny. I feel bad about naming my kid who's 8 days old sickly and puny, but yeah, that's what she did. So, but anyway, yeah. So no, that's actually an interesting point. I thought of Ruth when we were talking about this, and actually, I don't know if it's in the notes or not. I remember like going over it. Hold on.
Her two sons had two different wives.
Huh?
Her two sons had two different wives. One of them stayed in Moab and the other came back with Naomi.
Well, that was Ruth.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
thinking the choice of her staying with her mother-in-law probably was the part that.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking too.
Your God will be my God. Yeah, she said your
Yeah,
people will be my
yeah,
God.
that's what we said at me and Lori's wedding. Yeah, that was our vows to each other was out of Ruth. Yeah, I'm thinking that's pretty much it. Is the fact that she chose to go and be with the Jews and everything. But again, it's kind of like conjecture. I mean, there's no major thing that says one way or the other. But yeah, when she sits there and she says, "Your God will be my God," I'm going to be with you. I'm going to be one of your people. But yeah, it says right here, no actually, I don't know if you guys understand and everything. We actually talked about this in the book of in Genesis when we were talking about Lot, and it started talking about the Moabites and everything. You know what the name Moabite means? God's wash pot. It literally means God's toilet. Yeah. God doesn't like Moab. So it says, no Ammonite or Moabite or any of their descendants may enter the assembly of the Lord, not even in the 10th generation, for they did not come to meet you with bread and water on your way that you came out of Egypt, and they hired Balaam, son of Beor, from Pathor and Aram, Naharam, to pronounce a curse on you. However, the Lord your God would not listen to Balaam, but turned a curse into a blessing for you. Do not seek a treaty or friendship with them as long as you live. So now, we talked about this briefly. I think it was this class, maybe it was the other one and everything, but we were talking about in the biblical archaeology, of all the people in the Bible and everything, that there is actually a lot of archaeological evidence that says that he existed. He's actually on tablets and everything, is Balaam. Balaam was actually an incredibly powerful and very prominent prophet at this time. He's actually written on, I think at least 2 different stones that we found. Talks about Balaam. So it says, do not despise an Edomite, for the Edomites are related to you. Well, we know that's true because Edomites were essentially the descendants of Esau. And we kind of talked about that with the New Testament and everything. So it starts out with Jacob and Esau, and then it branches out to 2 different people. You have the Israelites, and then you have the Edomites. And then it actually goes right back down to 2 people, and those 2 people are Jesus Christ and Herod. Herod is half Edomite. And it's the only person in the Bible that Jesus has nothing to say to. He's confronted by Herod. He's asked questions by Herod. He says absolutely nothing, which in that particular situation, and especially that culture, that is the height of indignance. Jesus is basically looking at him, and I mean, without spitting in his face, that's pretty much what he's doing. He does not care for Herod. So, like I said, it kind of goes down in that aspect. But here it says, do not hate an Edomite. They are your relatives. Now, eventually, later on down in the story and everything, God will wipe the Edomites out. He will make them, essentially non-existent. At least as a large tribe, anyway. It says, for the Edomites are related to you. Do not despise an Egyptian, for you resisted a foreigner. That because you resided as foreigners in their country, the 3rd generation of children born to them may enter the assembly of the Lord. So, again, we also have to realize now, At this point, it probably would be a few generations, which is likely why God said third generation. But you have to remember, when they came out of Egypt, when they came out in the Exodus, there was a lot of Egyptians that came with them. So the exact same situation that would happen anywhere else, you know, I'm an Egyptian, I have a slave that is a Jew, and me and the slave get a little friendly, and then eventually we have a child that is a Jew Egyptian. When the Exodus comes, one of the things that the Bible talks about is the foreigners that come with them. So the foreigners are all those mixes. That's actually the word. One of the words they use is multitudes. So, and those people are the people that start having problems a little bit later on, because they're being asked to follow all these laws and everything, and they're not actually Jews. So it becomes a major problem in the desert. But that's how all that happened. It wasn't like they were finding girlfriends and everything out in the desert. It was the people that was coming along with them, all the children and stuff like that had been born in Egypt that were half Egyptian and half Hebrew. So it says, don't hate the Egyptians. However, he does say, don't ever go back there. It says, when you are camped against your enemies, keep away from everything impure. I'm going to be straight up honest with you. This one cracks me up. So as if your man is unclean because of a nocturnal emission, he is to go outside the camp and stay there. Just to be completely clear, a nocturnal emission is when the wife isn't home. Put it that way. But as evening approaches, he is to wash himself, and at sunset he may return to the camp. Designate a place outside your camp where you can go relieve yourself. This is the part that cracks me up. As part of your equipment, you have something to dig with. When you relieve yourself, dig a hole and cover your excrement. For the Lord your God moves about in your camp to protect you and deliver your enemies to you. Your camp must be holy, so that he will not see anything indecent and turn away from you. So God's basically like, guys, bury your crap. I'm walking around the camp, and I really don't want to step in anything. Now, in all honesty, there's a real practical matter to this, and it's actually something that was actually, I read several different commentaries, and one of the commentaries was talking about this, is, in wartime, when you have these gigantic camps, especially, back in the days of the Civil War, Revolutionary War, stuff like that, people would, kind of, do their business and all that kind of stuff. After a while, disease would start spreading, okay? And one of the reasons why is because they were not handling this like they should have handled it, okay? Nowadays, and, I'm a plumber, so I know all about it, but nowadays, we know that lots of disease and everything like that can come from, fecal matter and everything like that. I've had pink eye more than once. So back then, they probably didn't really understand that too terribly much, and it was just kind of like, well, I just went behind the rock or whatever, and that stuff would eventually, kind of get into the water or whatever the case may be, and people were getting sick. Lots of disease would be spread that way. So God's like, don't do that, bury it, get it out of the way. I don't want to see it, and and God says that elsewhere too. When he sits there and he says, and this is back in, I think, in Leviticus, when he's talking about how you walk up to the altar. He sits there and he says, make sure you're kind of, you're wearing something under there, because, I'm there at the altar, and I don't want to see that. That's literally what he says. He's like, I don't want to see your butt, no, put something on under there. If you're going to walk up to my altar, I don't want to look at that. So it's kind of the same thing here. Let's see here. Okay, so if a slave is taking refuge with you, do not hand them over to their master. Let them live among you wherever they like, in whatever town they choose. Do not oppress them. So if a slave runs away from somebody, and from another culture, or the case may be, and winds up in your town, don't try to turn them in and all that kind of stuff. Just leave them alone. It says, no Israelite man or woman is to become a shrine prostitute. You must not bring the earnings of a female prostitute or a male prostitute, bless you, into the house of the Lord your God to pay any vow, because the Lord your God detests them both. Okay, so again, and I kind of gave everybody a forewarning. We're going to be talking about a lot of risque stuff and everything in these chapters that we're reading, but maybe it's just me. But the more and more you read these laws, and the more and more you read a lot of the stuff and everything, I know the main concept, and, you know, I've said this before myself, that, you know, sin is sin, okay? For me to sit there and say my sin is better than your sin, or whatever the case may be, sin is sin, okay? All of it accomplishes the exact same goal. But in God's eyes, it seems to me that, you know, he sits there and he talks about sin and don't do this and don't do that, but the stuff that he really digs into, the stuff that he's just like, that is detestable to me, that is an abomination, I mean, really harsh language and everything, it always has to do with sex. It always has to do with some kind of a sexual sin, whether it's homosexuality, having an affair, being a prostitute, whatever the case may be. And again, that comes, you know, Paul talks about this when, you know, our bodies that are temples and stuff, you know, we think we're just sinning against ourselves, but we're not. You know, this is the temple of the Holy Spirit. Okay? That would be like me going to a church and basically painting pornographic pictures all over the walls is what it's like. Okay? And God's like, no, you're supposed to be holy. Doesn't mean you're perfect. Holy does not mean perfect, okay? Holy means set apart. We are set apart to God. So we are supposed to have that, you know, control over ourselves and not fall into that sexual sin. But like I said, as we read this, the stuff that he really digs into is always has to do with something that has to, that at least from what I can tell and everything, always has to do with some kind of sexual sin. It says, do not charge a fellow Israelite interest, whether on money or food or anything else that they may earn interest. You may charge a foreigner interest, but not a fellow Israelite, so that the Lord your God may bless you in everything you put your hand to in the land you are entering to possess. Says, if you make a vow to the Lord your God, do not be slow to pay it, for the Lord your God will certainly demand of it you, and you will be guilty of sin. But if you refrain from making a vow, you will not be guilty. Whatever your lips utter, you must be sure to do, because you made a vow freely to the Lord your God with your own mouth. So do we all remember what Jesus says about this? He says, don't do it. He said, do not make a vow to God. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. Okay? So when somebody sits there and says, I'll put my hand on a Bible, or when somebody sits there and says, I swear to God, okay? Jesus is just like, look, dude, don't need to be none of that, okay? Just say yes or say no, because if you say yes or you say no and you're wrong or something happens, it is what it is. But as soon as you do the whole I'll put my hand on a Bible thing and you don't do it, well, now the sin isn't against your brother, now it's against God. You know, now you have invoked his name to further and strengthen your position, and now you have completely and totally blown that. Okay? So, you know, and this is something that we probably hear more now than they did back then. But, you know, don't do that. Don't try to use God or the Bible or your profession of faith or anything like that to strengthen. If somebody you need somebody to believe you or whatever the case may be, don't do that. Okay, that don't have anything to do with you and God. And I'll just be flat out honest with you, even if it's harsh me saying this. If I'm trying to convince somebody of something and they don't believe me, then that probably tells me that at least in that person's life, I haven't been trustworthy. Okay, and that's my fault. That has nothing to do with God. So yeah, just don't do that. It says, if you enter your neighbor's vineyard, you may eat all the grapes you want, but do not put any in your basket. If you're in your neighbor's grain field, you may pick kernels with your hands, but you must not put a sickle to their standing grain. So what's this about? So we've kind of talked before and everything about God's welfare plan, you know, and we talked about, you know, how like they have to leave a tenth on the side of the fields and everything so that way people can do it. That's not this particularly, but it's kind of the same concept. If I'm walking through a field, and we see this happen in the New Testament, we see it with Jesus and the disciples. Okay, if I'm walking through a field and I'm starving, it is lawful for me to pick some grain as I'm walking and everything and eat. That's not stealing. That's just kind of like me satiating my hunger at that point. That's a human need, okay? Now, if all of a sudden I got a basket, I'm like, well, this is all for later. Now I'm stealing, okay? Now that's unlawful, okay? So, if I had teenagers in here that were less mature, I would say something like, this isn't going to fly in a store, okay? So as you're walking through the store, don't be picking the berries and the strawberries and everything, like, well, I didn't have a basket, bro, so the Bible says I can. So, yeah, don't do that. But this is just the way, again, God always puts human need and everything above, the law, per se. We've talked about that several times. So it says, if a man marries a woman who becomes displeasing to him because he finds something indecent about her, and he writes her a certificate of divorce, gives it to her, and sends her from the house, and after she leaves the house, she becomes the wife of another man, and her second husband dislikes her and writes her a certificate of divorce and gives it to her and sends her from his house, or if he dies, then her first husband who divorced her is not allowed to marry her again after she has been defiled. That would be detestable in the eyes of the Lord. Do not bring sin upon the land of your Lord is giving you as an inheritance. So again, we have a sexual sin. We have that harsh language. So what's up with that? So basically, it's one of those kind of things. It's like, look, in this particular case, and we could go through the whole, Jesus talking about why did Moses give a certificate of divorce because your hearts were hard and everything. But nonetheless, he still gave the ability. So it was within the law, okay? Jesus never said it was against the law. He just sat there and said, except for this reason and everything, you're not supposed to do this, okay? So there has to be a reason for it. And right here, it says the reason for it. The exact same reason Jesus gives. In other words, if he finds out that she is having an affair, okay, something indecent about her, okay, not that she can't cook eggs right, there has to be something indecent about her, okay? Again, we go back to the Greek word porneia, which means immorality. It also means perverseness. We get pornography from it. Okay? If he finds something out about her like that, and he sends her away, and she gets married, and for whatever reason, it doesn't mention and everything, but he sends her away, the first husband can't be like, well, I made a mistake. Come on back and everything. We'll work it out. God's like, no. You sent her away because of this sin, and now you want me to bless the union where you bring her back, and then if it happens again and everything, I'm supposed to be like, no. It's you ended it, walk away from it, and leave it alone, okay? Let her go live her life, you live your life. Oddly enough, I actually have a nephew that did this. I love him to death. He's actually a police officer and everything, but he married his wife, got a divorce, married her again, got a divorce, married another girl, and now they all go to Disney World together. So, they have a child together, so they're just like, hey, we're all friends and everything. If I tried to do that with Lori, put it this way, I would not be allowed into the assembly of the Lord anymore, okay? I don't know if y'all get that one, but no. Okay, so, but yeah, they're just like, hey, yeah, we're better friends than we are, husband and wife. Well, that's cool. I mean, I can appreciate that to a degree, but that just to me is like riding a razor thin edge. That's to me just an open door for something not cool to happen. But that's just me. So it says, let's see here, where am I at? 5. If a man has recently been married, he must not be sent to war or have any other duty laid on him. For 1 year, he is to be free to stay at home and bring happiness to the wife he has married. Wouldn't that be cool? If we got married and then we had a year off? The only problem with that is, I bet you the divorce rate would skyrocket. Be like, well, we're at 364 days. Peace out. Thanks a lot for the vacation. Hey, Susie, your turn. No, everybody would be getting married all over the place. But no, he's allowed to stay home. Obviously he's not going to be laying in bed the entire time and everything, watching Dexter or something like that, But I mean, he's basically at home. He's with the family. Consider it kind of like a biblical maternal leave kind of thing. He's just able to be with the family, set that up and everything before he's being asked to call to go away. Because remember, it isn't like, it's not saying he can't work and everything. And what it's saying is he can't be called to war. Well, what happens when you're called to war? You're gone. You could be gone for a year, 2 years, 3 years. So God gives you that brick of time to establish that relationship and get everything ready so that way when the time does come and everything, you have that solid foundation. So it says, do not take a pair of millstones, not even the upper one, as a security for debt. That would be taking a person's livelihood as security. So likewise, if someone is caught, or well, talks a little bit about it later. So do not take a pair of millstone, not even the upper one, as security for debt. So basically, if somebody owes you something, fine, they owe you something, but don't take away something that's going to basically ruin their livelihood. Okay? It's not really comparable to this, but the thing that just automatically pops into my mind is here recently I have been using my wife's car. My wife's car, which is a 4-wheel drive, and she's, believe me, not loving this, for my plumbing stuff. Because I promised her no drain clean material. No drain clean machines. But I have all my tools and everything, or a large portion of them, in my wife's 4-wheel drive because I can't get my van off my road. Okay? And I've had a couple people ask me, it's just like, well, hey, can you get here and all this kind of stuff? You know, like, hey, can you deliver a water heater? And I'm like, no, I can't. And one person kind of got a little flippy with me, and I told him, I said, listen, I said, I'm not trying to be rude by any stretch of the imagination, but I said, here's the thing. That van is my livelihood. If that van goes down, then my family suffers. You can deal with your leaking water heater for another week, or you can find somebody that can get to you faster. But I am not risking my livelihood so that way you have your water heater by tomorrow morning, okay? And, it's unfortunate that people are like that, but it's the same thing here. If somebody owes you something and you need to get something back from them or whatever, understand, you take away their livelihood, they're not going to be able to pay you back anyway, So kind of think about it clearly. It talks about stuff like that a little bit later on down the line, but next one is, if someone is caught kidnapping a fellow Israelite or treating or selling them as a slave, the kidnapper must die. You must purge the evil from among you. So again, kidnapping, you kill them. In the case of defiling skin diseases, be careful to do exactly as the Levitical priest instruct you, and you must follow carefully what I have commanded them. Remember what the Lord your God did to Miriam along the way after you came out of Egypt. So Miriam, Moses' sister, he caused her to have leprosy. Says, and as close as she was to Moses and everything else, she still had to sit outside, the camp and everything for 7 days, So basically what he's saying is I don't care what your station, I don't care how big you think you are, you do what you're told, because there's a reason for this. So it says, when you make a loan to any kind of your neighbor, do not go into their house to get what is offered to you as a pledge. Stay outside and let your neighbor to whom you are making the loan bring the pledge out to you. If the neighbor is poor, do not go to sleep with their pledge in your possession. Return their cloak by sunset so that your neighbor may sleep in it. Then they will thank you, and it will be regarded as a righteous act in the sight of the Lord your God. So again, if somebody owes you something, truthfully, the best thing you can do is forgive it. But, if you can't forgive it, then at least deal with them in whatever situation, they are. If somebody has no money whatsoever, you going in and sitting there going, well, you got your mother's wedding ring kind of thing, don't do that. I mean, I don't think anybody in this class would even think to do that, but, I got to teach it. It's in the Bible. Okay, so it says, do not take advantage of a hired worker who is poor and needy, whether that worker is fellow Israelite or a foreigner residing in your town. Pay them their wages each day before sunset because they are poor and they are counting on it. Otherwise, they may cry to the Lord against you and you will be guilty of sin. So again, don't take advantage. Parents are not to be put to death for their children, nor children to be put to death for their parents. Each will die for their own sin. Okay, so this is one that we have to really kind of think about. Now, we have to understand the finality of this statement, and we also have to understand in everything that there are circumstances that negate the statement, okay? And the reason why I say that is because, for instance, you have the story in, I want to say it's Leviticus, if I remember correctly, where God basically takes the entire tent and swallows it whole inside the earth, okay? Him, his wife, his babies, all dead, okay? So now you sit there and you go, well, wait a minute. That kid didn't have anything to do with that person, okay? That was the reason why that happened and everything is because God was literally eliminating the family, Okay, he was eliminating the family. Now, for all we know, that kid could have grown up to be the first Hitler. We don't know that. God does. But in that particular case, God eliminated, he just cut it out and just said, we're done with this one. Okay? But, again, God is giving, here's the thing we have to understand about this. God is giving the Israelites laws, okay, in the book of Deuteronomy. God is not giving them his laws. Okay, and what I mean by that is God is not sitting here saying, this is how I handle everything, and, I'm going to give you guys all the wisdom that I have, and I'm going to give you all the power that I have, and all that kind of stuff. He's not saying that. He's saying, I'm God. This is how I want you to handle this situation. Okay? If God feels differently about a particular situation, he will handle that situation in whatever way he chooses. Okay? But he is telling the Israelites, you do not do this. Okay? If a guy steals from you, you do not take him, kill him, and then go kill his wife, and then go kill his children. You do not do that. Okay? So, and, nowadays we have the ideology of just like, well, God's one of those kind of gods and everything. Do as I say, not as I do. Well, yeah, he's God. And I don't even mean to say that and everything by like, well, I'm this little speck of dust and he's God and there's nothing I can do about it. What I mean to say is he knows everything before, after, past, present, future, all situations, all scenarios. He is omnipresent. He is all powerful. I'm not. It's probably a safe bet to say he probably knows something about the situation that I don't. So for me to sit there and say and question, you said this and then you said that, that's going to be kind of, not only disrespectful, but also stupid. I don't think God has a problem with us questioning things. That Jesus answered questions all the time, and he did so most of the time in an indignant way. He said, yeah, this is this and this is that. This is how you're supposed to do this. This is how you're supposed to do that. And that's fine. If we want to sit down and we want to pray about it and we want to meditate about it and God, kind of open my eyes to why this is, that's one way of doing it. But if we're reading this and we're reading this from the aspect of this is what God does, we're kind of misleading ourselves because this is not what God does. This is what God is telling them to do. Okay? And that's how we need to be reading this. So in this particular case, where was I? Says 17. Okay, so yeah, parents are not to be put to death for their children, nor children to be put to death for their parents. Each will die for their own sin. Now, God has given multiple reasons why you should kill somebody, okay? But you kill that person. You do not go after their family. So it says, do not deprive the foreigner or fatherless of justice or take the cloak of the widow as a pledge. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt and the Lord your God redeemed you from there. That is why I commanded you to do this. So do not deprive the foreigner or the fatherless of justice or take the cloak of the widow as a pledge. Essentially what this is saying is treat everybody the same, okay? Everybody deserves justice. Everybody, it doesn't matter what their plight is. In this particular case, foreigner or fatherless, okay? Well, if you're fatherless, all right, then, you're probably illegitimate, okay? Just like if you're a foreigner, we talked about that before. There's a difference in biblical language between a foreigner and a stranger. A foreigner has all the rights, has all the privileges, all that stuff of a Jew, of a Hebrew, of an Israelite, okay? A stranger does not. They do not have that. A stranger is somebody walking through the land, okay? So a foreigner is somebody that is residing among them, okay? That is somebody who is residing among them. And they have to, many cases and everything, they have to abide by the same laws as the Israelites. But by the same token, they get the same amount of justice. But we all know human nature, and human nature is, you're not one of us, so we're going to treat you differently. And God's saying, don't do that, okay? And when he sits there, he talks about don't take the cloak from a widow, don't take everything she's got. We see that in the New Testament when Jesus is sitting there by the synagogue, and we see this old lady take the last little shekel that she has and gives it to the church, okay, or gives it to the synagogue, all right? And Jesus, he praises it, but by the same time, he praises it almost in disgust. Because he's just like, there was no reason for her to do that. She did that out of love of God, but it was very obvious that the people in the synagogue were guilting her into doing this. Oh, well, you're in bad straits. You should give more to God. If you give more to God, God will bless you. That's what they did. They basically did everything they could to get as much as they could from it. We see that why Jesus was whipping them, because they basically increased the exchange rate for temple shekels, and it's just like, no, you don't do that. You're not supposed to profit off of God, all right? So, it says, let's see here, when you are harvesting in your field and you overlook a sheaf, do not go back to get it. Leave it for the foreigner. So this is what we talked about before, the kind of like the homeless plan. So leave it for the foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow, so that the Lord God may bless you in all the work of your hands. When you beat the olives from your trees, do not go to the branches a second time. Leave what remains for the foreigner and the fatherless and the widow. When you harvest your grapes in the vineyard, do not go over the vines again. Leave what remains for the foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt. That is why I command you to do this. So basically, this is for whether it be the homeless or the welfare, whatever you want to call it. This was a plan so that way people who did not have anything or had very, very little could remain, had some modicum of pride and basically were able to take care of themselves. So when it says beat the olive branches, the way they get olives out of trees is they put these big old cloths and tarps down underneath an olive tree, and they just take a stick and they just start whacking the branches. And as they start whacking the branches, all these olives fall down onto the claws and stuff, and they pick them up, and then they carry them, and they, take them to an olive press or whatever the case may be, whatever they're selling them for. And he's like, look, do it once and walk away. If there's some left over, you don't need to get every one, leave them alone. Same thing with the grapes, same thing with your wheat field, all that kind of stuff. Leave it be, so that way they can come from behind you, they can work. That's the main thing here. They can work for their food, but there's food there to be had, okay? So they're not necessarily always getting, charity or whatever the case may be. They can actually work for their own food. So that's something everything that he commands them to do. He also commands, like I said, that a tenth, like in a wheat field, a tenth of the sides are to be left alone. So that way they can go through and glean from them and take what they need. Says when people have a dispute, they are taken to court, and judges will decide the case, acquitting the innocent and condemning the guilty. If the guilty person deserves to be beaten, the judge shall make them lie down and have them flogged in his presence with the number of lashes the crime deserves. But the judge must not impose more than 40 lashes. If the guilty party is flogged more than that, your fellow Israelite will be degraded in your eyes. So we kind of see that happen with Jesus, with the 40 lashes. So it says, do not muzzle an ox while treading out its grain. Okay, so in other words, while the ox is pulling, do not muzzle it so that way it can't eat the grain as it's going along. Okay, this is actually something that Paul mentions when he's talking about basically the financial aspect of what you do as like a man in ministry and everything. He sits there and he's talking. He's like, I have never taken a penny from you people. And I've talked about that before. Paul was very likely, I would say 99% sure of this, he was very likely independently wealthy. We know that just because he was a Roman citizen. He was born a Roman citizen basically from birth. The only way that's going to happen is most likely his father had enough money to buy his family Roman citizenship. That is expensive. We don't read anywhere about his father doing any kind of military service or anything like that, which would be another reason why that would be given out. So very likely it was purchased. And if that's the case, he had money. So he says, I never took a dime from anybody, and yet somehow, some way, and I know God was with him, don't get me wrong, but yet he was able to get basically around a large portion of the world. So he never has need for finances. He never takes an offering, and when he does, it always goes to the church in Jerusalem. He never takes an offering for himself. But he says, if I wanted to, I have the right to. Okay? Just like Peter takes along a believing wife, I have the right to do that if I want to do that. And if I, need finances for doing what I do to pay for my life as I am doing this, I have the right to do that. Okay? And it's the same thing here. The ox is doing all the work. Well, if you don't allow the ox to feed itself and take care of itself, the ox is going to drop dead. So, we have 4 awesome guys here in this church that basically kind of keep this place going, and yeah, for somebody to sit there and say, well, you love God so much, you're up there preaching all the time and everything, what do you need money for? Well, because I like food, and the roof over my head is nice, the fact of the matter is that this world rotates on money. So you have to have that to live. So to sit there and say, oh, we should just do this out of kindness of your heart, well, that's wonderful. Some people can do that, but most people can't. So that's what he's talking about there. But again, just from the practical aspect of it, feed your ox or it's going to drop dead. Let's see here. Do not okay, if your brothers are living together and now one of them dies without a son, his widow must not marry outside of the family. Her husband's brother shall take her and marry her and fulfill the duty of a brother-in-law to her. The first son she bears shall carry on the name of the dead brother so that his name will not be blotted out from Israel. However, if a man does not want to marry his brother's wife, she may go tell the elders of the town gate and say, my husband's brother refuses to carry on his brother's name in Israel. He will not fulfill the duty of a brother-in-law to me. And then the elders of his town may summon him and talk to him. And if he persists in saying, I do not want to marry her, his brother's widow shall go up to him in the presence of the elders, take off one of his sandals, and spit in his face, and say, this is what is to be done to the man who will not build up his brother's family line. That man's line shall be known in Israel as the family of the unsandaled. So, we talked about this before when we talked about the time when one of the Pharisees walks up to Jesus and says, okay, so hypothetical for you, okay, this is what they do. They take an idea and they argue it to the ridiculous degree to see how it holds up. That's just part of their culture. And so, that's what they do. They say, okay, so guy marries a woman. Brother dies. Marries the brother. Brother dies. Marries another brother. Brother dies. Marries another brother. Does this 7 times. Personally, if I was the 4th brother, I'd be like, don't know what you're cooking in the morning, but no thank you. That's just a little eerie. But nonetheless, whose wife is she going to be in the afterlife? And Jesus basically says in, the nicest biblical way, you're a moron. He basically says, it's just like, yeah, you don't really know what you're talking about. So nobody will be given in marriage in heaven, okay, but you will be like the angels. So that idea comes from this, okay? And essentially that's the way it works, is if I am married to somebody and I die, my brother, man, I feel sorry for the wife, but my brother would have to marry her, okay? And then essentially the first child that they have, that would be under my name. So my family line would continue, not just his. My family line would continue. After that, any other sons that they have obviously would be considered his sons. Okay? But that's the way it works. Now, again, you kind of have to look at that, and this is the reason why we can tell God is so strong about keeping those family lines intact, okay? Is because, again, you're sitting there thinking of the guy, and you're like, I don't want to marry this chick. I love Susie over here, maybe he has plans of his own. Maybe, his family has already arranged something and everything, and he's planning on marrying the girl that he's grown up with all his life. You don't know. But now all of a sudden he has this duty that he has to marry a girl that he doesn't likely love, may not even be attracted to, and now he is basically forced to get married to her and have children with her. So again, that's kind of like, brutal, but that's the way this culture is. And like I said, we kind of think of it as brutal, but to them, this is just Tuesday. This is very normal for them. So But that's the way it works. But again, it all goes back to keeping the family line going, which is exactly why God gives them all the laws about do not interbreed with people, do not do this, do not do that, because he is trying to keep this people intact, which has happened. I mean, blows my mind when you sit there and you think about all the places they've been scattered all around the world, but it in fact has happened. So,
What if the brother's already married?
then it goes to the next brother. Yeah, yeah. If he's already married and everything, it goes to the next brother. But you also have to realize that it's not like our culture, maybe I'll get married before such and such. It would be very unlikely for a younger brother to be married before the older brother. Now, obviously, if he's been married to his wife, after the fact or whatever, then yeah, it would just go down to the next brother if there in fact is a next brother. But yeah, the way that normally works is once a person is such age and once the girl is such age, they basically talk to the families and everything and hey, because they have to keep it in the family. Hey, your cousin and everything, she's at that age and everything, so let's go ahead and make a deal. They make a arrangement, a contract, they're betrothed, and then after usually what takes about a year, he goes and he fixes up a place for her. After the father is ready, he sends him to go get his bride. After that, they have a wedding, which usually lasts about 7 days, and then they're officially married at that point. And that's
She had the right to inheritance from her husband that passed away, right?
yes,
If the brother married her.
yes,
And that's one reason why he may not, because he wouldn't want that part of the inheritance to go to her.
yeah.
Yeah, which is
Yeah,
wrong. But that's,
yeah. That's just it. Is that there's always something and everything kind of in the wings of as opposed to just doing God's will and everything. Which again, I hate to say this, but I get that. I completely understand that. I feel called to teach the Bible, but it would if somebody told me that all of a sudden I had to be a missionary or else I couldn't be a Christian, it would just be kind of like, well, what? It's just like, well, that's what you have to do. So I understand that train of thought. It's just like all of a sudden somebody walking up to me and going, well, your brother's died, so you know what you have to do. And just like, number one, it would be kind of weird for me to just, have that intimate relationship with my brother's wife, but that's the way God has it set up. So that way that family line does not break. And if they refuse to do it, which clearly has happened, they're marked. They're basically marked by the community and everything is basically saying, you're basically an outcast at that point. So
where does that whole marriage tradition come in?
what marriage tradition?
That they talk to the families and then there's usually a year and the guy builds a house next to his parents' house. I mean, that's not in here at all, is it?
The part and everything where he goes and he sets a place, yeah, that is in there. Now, as far as the 7 days for the wedding and all that kind of stuff, that I don't necessarily know. I think a lot of that is actually tradition, but the aspect of the father, yeah, that is in there because that actually ties in with the rapture. Where it talks about how the father will tell the son when it is time, he must go and he must build a place.
That's New Testament.
No, that's in the Old Testament. I mean, I'd have to go back and look and find it exactly, but no, it's in the Old Testament. So basically, the way it works is once the person is betrothed, okay. So say I'm betrothed to a woman, all right. Now my job is basically to go to my father's house, and depending on my father's income and everything, I can either build a room, or I can build an addition, or whatever the case may be. But it's not for me to say when it's ready. It's for my father to say when it's ready. So that kind of comes into play and everything when Jesus leaves and he sits there and he says, I go to prepare a place for you, okay? And when it talks about in the Sermon on the Mount, when he sits there and he says about that day, okay, I don't know, the angels don't know, only God the Father knows. That days that he's talking about isn't the second coming, it's the rapture. That's the day when God tells Jesus, the Father tells the Son, it's time to go get your bride. And that's when he comes and he grabs us, his bride, and he takes us back to the place that he prepared for us. It's all mixed up in the same thing.
Okay. I had a discussion with somebody about why do you have to get married in front of a pastor or an official, because that's not biblical. they didn't have a priest.
So,
And I just
To a
wanted
degree-
to know where I could find it.
so to a degree, that's true. But here's the thing. So, and I don't know. I can't remember where I taught this. It was somewhere here, but I really can't remember what class it was, or maybe it was even in residency. I can't remember. But here's the thing. When you look at marriage and you look at, what it is intended to be, okay, go all the way back to the very beginning. All the way back to Adam and Eve, all right? And some people would sit there and say, well, they weren't even really married, okay? But the truth of the matter is they were, because God created Eve, all right, out of Adam, and in front of the presence of God himself. The very first thing he said is, this is bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh, and I will call her Isha, because she was made out of Ish, okay? That was his wedding vow. That was his vow right then and there, that this beautiful creature that you have made for me, I will take care of her for the rest of my life. And he did that in the presence of God. Now, I am not a pastor. All I did was go online and I just signed something and everything that sits there and says I can marry somebody legally in the state of Missouri, okay? No big thing. Anybody can do that. Anybody in this room can do that, okay? But it's not the pastor legal purposes. He has to sign the paper, okay? But when we are marrying one another, we are doing it, if we're doing it in the proper way, we are doing it in front of God. We are doing it we are saying those vows to each other in the presence of God.
So common law marriage would be fine.
Common law marriage and everything is basically two people that are too lazy to actually say those vows and don't really care, and they basically just live long enough where they most of the time forget about it until the woman looks at them or the guy looks at the woman and sister and says, yeah, basically everything you own I now own half. That's common law marriage. That is basically, I've known people that were common law married. It was just two people that had no real, number one, they weren't Christians. They had no real appreciation for the concept of marriage. Okay? Marriage is a commitment to one another, verbally, physically, spiritually, locked into place, saying no matter how bad this gets, we're not breaking up, we're not separating. That's marriage. Now, some people may look at me and go, you're a complete hypocrite because I've been divorced twice. But at the same point, and I've always been honest about that. But the marriage that I have now, we're getting ready to celebrate 10 years. And the marriage that I have now, it's exactly like that. Me and her will get into some, brouhahas big time, okay? And, we've said things to each other and all that kind of stuff and everything. But at the end of the day, she's mine. And I'm hers. And that's not going to change. So, that's what marriage is. But, like I said, at the end of the day, unfortunately in this culture, our version of marriage is very skewered. Because
they've been together 12 years and they say they're married, but they just...
And they have a common law marriage, is that what you're talking about?
Well, I don't even know if there's that in the state anymore, but...
I don't think there is.
I don't know either.
So there is. But
It's been a long time since I went to law school, so I really don't.
I just...
I put it this way, I knew a guy...
You don't have to go through the legal stuff. We're just committed to each other.
I knew a guy, he's since passed away from a motorcycle accident, but I knew a guy that was pretty wealthy and everything, and he, every 6 years, he would actually get a place for her, and he would make her move out for 6 months. Because after the 6 months, the time span broke. And then she would be able to come back and live with him, because he did not want her to be technically common law married to him, because he did not want her to have what he had. To which, after that personally, if my wife sat there and said, yeah, you gotta leave for 6 months, everything of mine's gonna be yours, I'm gonna be like, if I'm leaving for 6 months, I ain't coming back. But that was the way that relationship worked. So where are we at?
11.
Okay, so we'll do this one and we'll stop. This is a nice one to stop on. Okay, so if two men are fighting and the wife of one of them comes to the rescue of her husband from his assailant and she reaches out and seizes him by the private parts, you shall cut off her hand, show her no pity. Okay, so again, this kind of goes to, once again, I said, like I said earlier, when it comes to sexual sin, God seems to have a serious issue when it comes to this, okay? I'll be straight up honest with you. I'm not exactly sure what situation I would be in that my wife would have to come out and grab the other guy's private parts. But maybe this has happened. And I don't know why God would mention it if it never did. So nonetheless, whop off her hand. That's a no touching area. No go. Don't do that. And if she does that, then there's going to be a penalty for that. So that's a good way to end the class. All right. Well, we will go ahead and we'll stop there and we'll start. You guys got to remind me. I'll forget, but we're on, I guess, 13. Okay. So I hope I didn't make anybody blush or anything like that. Like I said, there was a whole lot of that. It's messed up. I went over there and I was learning that class, and the entirety of the class was about adultery, and then I came over here. I'm all messed up today.
By the way, he redeemed Naomi, and Ruth just went along with that. She was part of the package.
Oh, okay. Yeah, like I said, I know there's obviously a loophole and everything in there. I just, I guess I probably didn't have the due diligence to kind of check it out. I know the story of Ruth very, very well. Like I said, it's 4 chapters. That's actually the wedding vows that me and my wife used. But it's actually one of my favorite books of the Bible, just because when it talks about the kinsman redeemer, and we kind of match that up with Jesus Christ and everything. I mean, he is our kinsman redeemer. He did everything. He had the resources because he lived a life with no sin. He had the placement because he was fully God but also fully human, and he was willing to do it. He did not go up to that cross and everything because of some, God said you're doing this or else. He did it willingly. When you read, especially when you read the book of John, you see he drove the events to the cross. Okay, he was not some, this poor thing happened to this poor person and everything. No, he woke up every day while he was in Jerusalem at Passover, basically trying to tick them off. And he drove the events to the cross. He went there willingly for us. All right, let's pray real quick and we'll get out of here. Heavenly Father, thank you so much. It's definitely been an interesting night. We learned a lot of your laws, and some of them, I'll be honest with you, Lord, we're kind of baffled by. But that's okay. The Bible never tells us that we're supposed to understand every little thing, and you never promised that to us. But when we get and we were able to kneel down before you, I'm sure all of it will become very, very clear. Lord, we just want to say we love you. We thank you so much for everything that you do. You truly are the King of the universe. You are the King of everything. You have created this universe, this world, the people that we know, everything in it, and it's humbling, and it truly is just amazing to think about how great you are. But Lord, just help us never to forget it. We love you. We thank you so much for everything you do, and we're so appreciative, and we want to say thank you. We pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.